Welcome to the 1015 podcast. This is Philip Schlump, and we're going to talk about human factors because humans are important. At least to computers, humans are really important. So, I wanted to start off talking about a project that I worked on. It was a fairly decent project. I'm to this day appreciative of all the things that went on in that project. I got brought in to do a software piece of it. And I was a replacement for a company that was failing, and I took on a lot of risk, but I delivered the product. And this was for a company, Information Handling Systems. They've become Information Handling Systems Amerikit some 20, 30 years later, but they had a vast database that they wanted searched in a particular way. And I convinced these folks that I could write the software to do the search, and that the people that they had working on it were basically failing. And that was good. I made a bunch of money on that, finished up version 1, and I actually left the project. I was a contractor, and there are some laws that cause you contractors to leave after a certain amount of time, and I was well within that, but I left the project, took some time off after having worked crazy hard for a long time to get that project out the door. And about 2 months later, I was just goofing off doing other things when they called me up and asked me to come back, and this was an unusual request. They wanted me to take over running the project. And I knew the guy that had been in charge, the project leader for that project, junior VP at the company, and he was, I thought, really good and capable, but I found out what had happened is he was losing his sight due to masticular degeneration. This is nerve degeneration in his brain connecting to his eyes. And that, he was going blind, and they wanted me to come in while I could still work with him, and he had actually recommended me to take over the project. This would have been their maintenance release that they were doing, and I came in, and my job was to take it over, run it for a while, and they were going to find somebody permanently to be the lead on the project. And I came back, took over, ran it for 5 months, something like that. Mostly, it was going along smoothly. The people there knew me. It was an easy transition, and I took over running the project. And they found somebody that they thought was competent to lead the project. Okay, a bright young lady that, great technical merits, just really sharp. And so I left, and this was a time of year when I wanted to take off and do a bunch of other things that were important to me, like rock climbing and stuff like that. So I took off and was going back to being a bum again, which actually I've done a lot of. And, I actually spent about 6 months not working. I had picked up a couple short-term things and did some tuning contracts and stuff like that. It was all short-term stuff. 2-3 days, and I'd be off goofing off again and doing other things. And at this point, I also had a software consulting company that I had built, and basically most of my work was spent doing recruiting and placement and sales. I wasn't doing anything technical. And they were supposed to get out version 2, and finally they called me one day and they said, our project is in really deep trouble. They haven't made any progress and everybody is at everybody's throats. And I'm going, what's the deal? This was a well-run project. 2 of us had succeeded and it was doing really well. And so I went back and all the guys were, and it was all guys except for the product manager. She was a lady, but all the rest of them were just you could just feel the tension in the air when you went in there. I mean, it was palpable hatred, and everybody was just at everybody. And I was kind of like, should I even bother? Should I just disappear from here? And they told me they wanted me to come back, and it was for a lot of money because the project was really in trouble. And so I said yes, mostly for the money. I didn't know if I could straighten it out or not. And the first thing I did was we need to change the culture of this project. We've got to make fundamental changes in this team. And I thought about just getting rid of some of the people, some of the contentious little factions. And I went, no, we're going to try it a different way. And so I hired this lady, Kara. Now, Kara was a recent college graduate, and I had interviewed her for something else and decided that she probably was, although a very nice person, really couldn't program. And so you go, why is he hiring somebody in a team that can't program. I brought in Kara. Kara was a personality. She was, vivacious and energetic, and she was really one of those people. Okay? And I brought her in, and I put her in every design meeting they had, every group meeting, and I told the guys from now on, everyone has to be polite in meetings with Kara because we have a lady on the team. And suddenly the culture started to change. And I enforced everyone has to be kind to her, everyone has to be polite. And the culture changed. And I started doing some technical reviews, but basically, the key ingredient here turned out to be, how do we get these guys not to fight with each other? I put a lady in the room. She had to participate. She had to sign off on things. They had to be nice to her. And the people side of this was far more important than the technical. The technical side, all of these people were good, they were capable, but all of them were strong-willed, project-oriented, and they had their own individual ideas of how to do stuff. And instead of cooperating with each other and coming to some sort of a resolution, they were just banging heads, and they weren't getting the product out the door. And so, project-wise, I assigned Kara basically things that made no difference to anything because I knew she probably wasn't going to get them done. And sometimes she did get them done, but they didn't really work right. But I didn't care. And she was the critical component in turning this thing around and getting everyone to work together. And the reality of most success in this world today is teams are what make things happen. And there is no I in team. What's important is setting norms and establishing communication and resolving disputes in a fashion where you're going to agree, even if you don't like it, that when we've resolved it, we're going to move forward in a particular direction. And those norms, which are unstated, a lot of times in groups, those norms are the critical piece to getting teams to work together. I've learned since then that it's really important if you write them down. For remote work, that becomes a critical thing. Like, how are we going to communicate, and when do you expect people to respond to your communication? How quickly? If I send you a message, do I expect a response in an hour, as opposed to sending you an email and it'll be, before the next meeting? I mean, what are the norms in this group? How do we share data? What kind of documents do we build? What's acceptable behavior? And those norms in a group are the critical piece. Now, that's going to be true when you do group projects in school. If you start out with, let's establish norms, let's figure out what the group is and how the group is going to work together and what the group wants, that will make successful groups. If you just start out and you go, okay, well, we're just going to chop up the work and we're going to divide it up to people based on, you take this and you take this, if your work is the kind that has a nice, clean list of these are the steps and these are the pieces, that authoritarian approach works some of the time, and it can be productive some of the time. But more than likely with computer things, you're building something new, and nobody has the answers to how everything is going to come together. And you have to help each other, which means that you've got to rely on each other and work together as a team. And that relying on each other and working together as a team really depends on norms. Let me tell you another story about norms and, violating them. When I was going to college here, I worked for the IT department. It was a little different IT department back then, 30 years ago. There's a parking lot south of Old Main that used to be a hospital that was then purchased by the university and became the IT center, and that's where our offices were in the old hospital. And there was a retired military colonel that was the head of all of the, shall I say, customer service. All the things that had to do with, reaching out to the customers, helping them, the help desk. He was the guy that was in charge of that. He was my boss. Good guy, sharp, very good with people. And one day he passed off to me this request from, the president's office for a replacement terminal over there. And I didn't think much about it. We'd put in a bunch for the people using the computer. And these were terminals. These weren't computers. These all connected to the mainframe. And you got text. Okay? And the new ones we'd put out there were these DEC VT102s. They were nice. They had pleasant white text. It was a nice font. They were a big upgrade from the old ones that were these really nasty green screen things. And the screens were bigger. They were just much nicer machines. In any case, I trundled over there to find out what the deal was. I just figured one of them had broken, and I go to this person up on right outside the president's office of the university. And I go in there and, I say, well, I got this ticket. I came over here to look at this. Okay. And there is this lady that I've known for years because I worked in our ANS dean's office. And she says, my terminal is broken. And my eyes kind of roll to the left, and I'm looking at that old green screen, and it's not setting on her desk. It's setting up on the end of this counter. And she points at it, and she says, it's broken. I want a new one. And she is the senior secretary, but she's a secretary, and she's close to retirement. I know this. She is old, and she isn't learning anything new. And all the computer stuff is new. And I look at it, and it's covered with dust. And right beside the terminal is this box that you turn on to connect to the computer. And the little box is turned off, which means not only is it covered with dust, okay, it hasn't been turned on in months, maybe ever. So she's not using it. But, she wants a new terminal because everybody else in the office got a terminal. And she doesn't have one. And obviously, since she's the senior secretary, she has status. And she needs a terminal. So I go over there, flick on the little box, log in, okay, dust it a little bit. And I say to her, sitting there, well, I logged in. I'm not seeing the problem. And she stands up. She's got short gray hair, about 5'2". And she reaches over, looks at it. And right there in front of me, okay, now this is a full height standing area on the end of a counter. It's sitting right on the end of the counter. She just pushes it off the edge of the counter and it goes falling to the floor. And she says, see, it's broken. And I go, oh, I understand now. It's broken. And it was. The case was broken. It was cracked. I mean, it was still plugged in and it was still turned on and it still had characters on the front. But it was most definitely broken. And I'm thinking to myself, we don't have another terminal to give to this lady. These things are expensive and they were in short supply. And I go, all right, I'll bring you a new one. Now, at that particular point in time, I was also working on a research project and there was a computer in the machine room that had a DEC VT100 that was its console. And the deal between the VT102 and the VT100 is DEC had goofed up. There was a problem with the power supply on this series of VT100s, and they would just go off and do spastic things every once in a while. So they couldn't sell them, so they were shipping them as consoles for their computers. And I go, all right, I'll go find a box. I'm going to pack up that VT100, and I'm going to take it over to her. And I'm looking as I roll away the cart with the broken terminal, and I'm looking at that thing and going, man, these ancient terminals, they're indestructible. I mean, they were built for 1,000 years. I wonder if this thing still works right. And I go up to my office and I plug in the ancient terminal, and the keyboard's kind of pushed in on one side now, and I find a clothespin and a screwdriver, and I pry up the keyboard and I jam that clothespin underneath the broken part of the case, and I put some duct tape on, and it's working just fine. So I took it down to the machine room and I swapped out my, defective power supply terminal for her case broken terminal, and I plug it in and it's working just fine. I go, okay, well, this is a deal. And I take the VT100 and I package it up very carefully back in the box so it looks brand spanking new. Okay? And physically, it looks just like a VT102. There's no physical difference. It's just that it's got this goofy problem. And I load it up, okay, and I take it over to her. Plug it in, hook it up. I mean, she hasn't logged in maybe ever. So I don't see why this is going to make any difference to her. I show it to her, set it up on the end of the counter. She's happy. I'm happy. I go away. about a month later. Yeah, it was about a month. And she calls me, and I don't know how she got my number. But she says, the terminal you brought over is doing something goofy. And I go, wow, well, let me come over and take a look at it. And I head trundling across to take a look at it. And on the way over, okay, there was a big wing feather from a bird. There was a roost of birds over there by Old Main back then, too. And I pick up the wing feather, and I'm thinking about, well, I got this wing feather, and it's probably not very clean, and I should clean it. And I bop my head in on another person that I know over there, and I say, do you have like some alcohol and some cotton swabs? I'd kind of like to clean this feather. And, she says, yeah, and she runs off. I've done some things for her, so she's owes me, and she goes off in the women's bathroom and comes back with a bottle of alcohol from their medicine cabinet in the women's bathroom and some cotton swabs, and I clean it, and I go on up to the 4th floor where this lady's thing is with my feather, and I'm looking at it, and I go, how am I going to convince her never to call me again? What I have to do is I have to have a magical fix for this. And I'm looking at it, and finally I go, yeah. And this is so far enough in the past that there was actually somebody in the office that smoked. And I've got these cotton swabs that were just coated with alcohol, so they're going to burn really well. And they have a lighter sitting there on their desk. And I reach over, pick up the lighter. Without them, I'm talking to her. They don't notice I've like kiped their lighter for a second. Okay? And I look at her in all seriousness, and I say, and there's funny characters going all over the screen. This thing just went spastic when there was a problem. And I say, I think there's a computer demon in there. And she looks at me in all seriousness, and she says, are you serious? I said, yes, I'm going to cast out the demon. And I take the feather out, okay, now I've got the lighter hidden in my hand and the cotton ball, and I go, man, I hope I don't burn myself doing this. And I start dancing, and I'm chanting around the computer, and I'm dancing and chanting. And finally, I reach back behind with my right hand with the cotton ball and swab outside of her, and I strike the lighter, and there's this puff of smoke that goes up at that moment in time. And I go, I cast you out, demon of the computer. And I reach back and turn off the power and turn on the power to cycle the power to reset the power supply. And it comes back on and everything works. Okay? And she looks at me and she says, oh my goodness, it worked. Okay? Well, as you would expect, a couple weeks later, she calls me and she says, the computer has demons in it again. Okay? And this time I go, man, we better do something better than this. Down the hall from me was this guy that had been bugging me to go to church. Just Christian evangelical, just wants me to go to church. And I bop down to Ray's office. And I say, Ray, you mind if I borrow your Bible for a little bit? And you can just see the smile on his face. Oh, we've just made his day. And I take the Bible, head over there. I've got the feather with me again. Okay? And this time I've come prepared. I brought my own lighter and my own cotton balls, and I figure we're going to step this up to the next level. And this time I go over the river with the feather, and I'm going, and I open the Bible to some random location. I don't know where. And I say, in the name of Jesus Christ, I cast the computer demons out of this computer. And I do it again with a little smoke and everything and the fire, and I power cycle it. And so, it works. And I go back to my office, not thinking too much about this, with kind of a smile on my face as I'm doing this. And the next morning, I'm in there at my office, and remember the head of our department? He calls me on the phone, and I think, uh-oh, this isn't good. And he says, could you come over to my office? We have something important to talk about. And I kind of go over to his office, and I'm kind of thinking, well, I'm in trouble now for that shenanigan I pulled. And he says, first thing out of his mouth was, close the door. And I go, yeah, I'm in deep now. And he says, the president of the university called me this morning. I said, oh, what about? And I got a little smile on my face. I go, if we're going to go down with the ship, we might just well smile about it, play the music as the Titanic sinks here. And he looks at me and he says, he told me about what you did yesterday. And I said, oh, really? And I'm thinking to myself, this is going to be bad. This is going to be really bad. Okay, and I'm beginning to get that sweaty feeling, when you're in deep trouble and you've gotten caught, and this is going to be bad. And he looks at me in all seriousness. And he says, you are not ordained or authorized to do any more computer excommunications. Is that clear? And it was very quiet, and I said, well, yes, sir, that's perfectly clear. And he said, dismissed. And I left the room. So I'm just telling you, in the Human Factors Department, I am not going to excommunicate any more computer demons. And I can prove there's demons in computers. If you put too much power inside the computer chips, a little puff of smoke comes up as the computer genie escapes from the chip. And I know they're in there someplace. But I am not ordained or authorized to excommunicate any more demons from computers. I just fix bugs and move on in the software. So, the norms in her group were that since she was the senior secretary, she had to have the best equipment, even that she never used it. And you've got to understand the power of those norms. I mean, that is the status. That's how the organization works. And if you don't set norms in your groups, and if you don't work with those norms and make certain that they're working for you, they'll work against you. So this is part of the human factors. Now, as computer people these days, and this is becoming more and more true, we're the ones that set the standards for things. Oh, I know the regulators can say, by golly, this is the way we're going to do it, and this is the law. But when you get right down to it, okay, the computer people that implement the software are the ones that make the final decision on most of this stuff. And if you don't get it right, or you do something else, or it has a different drop-down, whatever is in the drop-down is the law. I'll give you an example of that. We lived 5-some years on a sailboat, and when we came back, my daughter wanted to get a driver's license. She'd been here, we'd done some things, and she wanted to go out and do training with me to get her driver's license. This is all cool. She's of the right age, and we go out to the driver's place here in Laramie, and we sold our house in Denver. I'm living with, yes, my mom, who's now 87 years old and going blind. We're taking care of her. And consequently, I don't have any utility bills because she pays them all. She was paying them before we got here. And I have to prove residency in Wyoming. Now, when we sold our house in Colorado and sold everything, we moved on board a boat. We didn't have any of these things that you normally consider residency. So for driver's license, before we moved on board the boat, I bopped up here to Wyoming and I got a Wyoming driver's license. But it turns out for proof of residency, you need more than a driver's license. And I talked to the lady out there and she says, well, you can have these things. And she shows me what the requirements are. And I'm looking at this list and I don't have any of these things. But there's some things on there that I can get away with. And the first one was I could get a hunting or fishing license. And I think to myself, I wonder if you can get these online. Now, I went off and I got a hunting license and I got it online. And I made a nice printout of the thing showing I had a hunting license. And the second one was voter registration. And I go, let's go and see if we can register as a voter. And I wander in and I'm talking to people, and luckily enough, I'm from Laramie, Wyoming, and I graduate here, and I see somebody that I know from high school. Okay, and I say something about her to her voter registration, and she says, "Oh, I'm in that department. Come over here, and I'll get you registered." And she registers for me. I promise you, she never checked my ID. Of course, I did go to high school with her. Okay, and she's known my family from before I was born. She knew my family, and she knows that we're local, so she knows who I am, and I get voter registration. So I go out there to the DMV again with my daughter to take the test for her, and I have to prove residency, and I show them the voter registration card, and they go, okay, and I show them a thing of the hunting license. And the lady looks at me and she says, "Oh, I can't take a hunting license." And I said, "But you showed me on there where it says that hunting licenses are legitimate." And she says, "Oh yeah, it says that, but it isn't in the drop down on the computer. I can't put in hunting license as a reason for you being a resident." And I say, "Well, I don't have anything else." And I'm talking to her in a very kind tone, and she says, "I don't know what to do, because it isn't in the software. I mean, I know it's in the regulations, but it isn't in the software, so we can't take it." And I say, "Well, you're going to have to take it, because this is what it says." And so she calls over to the state, and about 20 minutes later, she looks at me with a smile and she says, "Okay, I found out what to do." And she put something else in the drop down. It still didn't have hunting license. She just faked it. And basically, although the law said hunting license, the reality was that, yeah, you had to put in what was in the drop down. And it didn't matter what the law said. What counted was what was in the drop down on the software. Now, you go, so what's the big deal? You got residency, your daughter, she got her driver's license. And I'd tell you the big deal is really this. When we go out and we use machine learning and we're building a system, say for determining whether somebody gets to be on parole or gets sent back to prison, if we don't get that system right, then people are going to end up in prison. People have ended up on death row because people didn't get the systems right. Okay? And these days, the right is not what the law says or what is the correct thing. It's what's in the software. So our responsibility for the human factors in this is that we're responsible for the ultimate authority in how most of these systems work. We're the ones that make the final decision. What's in the drop down? Is the machine learning system actually doing the right thing? Is it just picking out some keywords when it grades, or is it really breaking down and understanding what these students are doing? And in all of those different kinds of cases with human factors, you have to always remember the computer is just as dumb as a rock. It's going to do what we tell it to do. We as the programmers. And with machine learning, we're the ones that are picking the inputs. We're deciding what it learns, and we've got to ask the question when we get done learning, what did it actually learn? How does it do this? Why does it do what it's doing? And those are the important factors that you've got to glean out of all of this. It's not just that we test it and did it work on our test data set. That's great. It's what does it do in the real world? Increasingly with machine learning, life and death decisions like self-driving cars, medical instruments, diagnoses, blood diseases, all of these things are coming out of the machine learning, out of computers. And those are the responsibilities that we have to understand the human factors in this, and did we get it not just correct enough to pass a homework exercise, but did we actually get it right? Where it's doing the right thing. You get it right, it is awesome. And you get it wrong, and bad things are going to happen. So that's what I wanted to touch on human factors. Remember, if you're in a team, start out with norms. Start out figuring, how are we going to communicate? What are the rules in our group? What are we going to do together? How are we going to apportion the work so that the person that's best at doing that kind of work does that kind of work? Not assign programming just because you were hired as a programmer, but like Kara, assign you're going to meetings and you're going to keep everybody sane, because she was good at that. By the way, when I left that project, the next person that came in couldn't stand Kara because she couldn't produce any work, got rid of her, and they never released another version. So, it's critical that you get it right in the people department first. And there is no I in team. With that, I bid you adieu.